I'll give it 2 more minutes, then we can get started, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. Okay, once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sim Dube, team leader for Trade Forward Southern Africa. This is a project funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. So thank you for joining the Trade Forward Southern Africa webinar, and together with our partners, SAIC and Africa House, we are happy to actually present to you the Sub-Saharan Renewable Energy Projects Database pre-launch webinar. We are also honored to have His Excellency Anthony Philipson with us today. He's the British High Commissioner to South Africa, who will grace us with a few words about the support that His Majesty's government is giving to the TFSA program and by extension to the sector. Before we start the webinar, I think I'll just share quickly our agenda just to make sure that we're all clear in terms of what we expected to do in the next hour. I'll just quickly share and not take too much of your time so that we can actually get our experts talking to the activities. So we're starting off with, we're going to have my colleague Cleopatra Ngulube, who's a senior value chain specialist for Trade for Southern Africa. She'll be introducing TFSA and also just talking briefly about the work that TFSA in Southern Africa is doing in the green sector, in the green tech sector. And then again, we'll have His Excellency Anthony Philipson, who is actually gracing us today, as I mentioned earlier, with his presence, just to talk about the announcement of the database host. As we all aware, there's been a lot of work going on, and it's quite important that we actually share this renewable energy database with a partner that's going to be taking it forward as the project winds up. Then we're going to have Duncan Bonnet, director at Africa House. He's actually been the brains behind the database, so he's going to be talking about the database and actually expanding on what to expect and what it looks like. So he's going to share a bit in terms of what the back end and maybe the front end looks like clearly. And then we're going to have our partners, SAIC, who are actually going to be taking this database forward. And we have the CEO, Mrs. Shiboni Evans, who's going to be just talking about the role of SAIC in terms of where we're going with the database going forward. We'll take time as well for Q&A. I will actually moderate that piece, and then we close at 12 o'clock for 5 minutes. So without taking too much time, I'll just ask my colleague Cleo to maybe just give us a brief outline in terms of what Trade Forward is and what we are doing currently in the space. Thank you, Cleo.
Thank you, Sim, and welcome everybody. So I will just give you briefly an overview of TFSA to lay out the journey that has led us to this point that we are at today. So first of all, for those who haven't had the chance to interact with TFSA before, TFSA is a trade development program that's funded by the UK government through the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, which is FCDO. And the program is implemented by DAI in partnership with 3 organizations, that's Africa House, LM Services, and Imani Development. So the aim of TFSA is to enhance export capacity of businesses and to stimulate export growth in the SACO plus Mozambique region. And one of the approaches that TFSA undertook or has been undertaking is implementing interventions that have been designed and targeted at specific economic sectors that have the potential to achieve accelerated growth within the program timeframe of TFSA in terms of driving that export growth and export capacity of businesses. And one of those sectors that TFSA identified to do so was the green technology sector specifically, of which within that sector, the renewable energy was the main focus. It stood out to have the greatest potential to really drive the exports in the region. in that green overall wide scope of the green technology sector. So in addition to targeting the sectors, the approach that we also employed was to align the sectors to the countries with the greatest potential to drive the growth of that particular sector in the region. And it is in this regard that South Africa was identified to have the infrastructure that is institutional or otherwise to really drive the growth of the renewable energy sector within the region. And our aim really was to achieve this by aligning South Africa's supply side potential with the demand growth that is being experienced within the region. Because whilst South Africa is it has the potential regionally, it's still the sector is still nascent. And it's still growing, but it has the potential, and hence we focused on that particular sector and said there is some support that can go into the sector to ensure that it develops, and the export sector and the exports can grow, and also by so doing drive the growth of that particular sector in the region. This is why we are here today, to share with you one of the outcomes of those interventions which were designed in aligning that supply side and the growth in the demand side. So without further ado, I will hand over back to Sim so that we can hear more about this particular outcome, which will be further introduced by the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cleo. I think it's pretty clear in terms of the work that we've been doing. And all this work would not be possible, clearly, without His Majesty's government. And there's been a lot of support. The funding is coming from His Majesty's government. And it's important that we have our High Commissioner, Mr. Anthony Philipson, joining us today, and just to give us a few words. So over to you, sir, just our gratitude to you as a funder.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure and an honour to be with you this morning and to be joining this event supported not only by Trade Board Southern Africa, but also our partners in SIAC, Africa House, DAI, and others. I mean, I think there is no greater topic at the minute than how we think about the future of energy sectors in South Africa and Southern Africa. Those of us who live in South Africa, I don't need to talk about the energy challenges that are talked about a lot by the government, including in the President's recent State of the Nation address, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about it in the Finance Minister's budget statement here tomorrow. But that's just one reason why I'm absolutely delighted to have the chance to say a few words at the outset of this hugely important event, I think, the pre-launch of the Sub-Saharan Renewable Energy Projects Database. As was just mentioned there by Cleopatra, if I may say, that the green technology and renewable energy sector still relatively new, nascent in the region, but it's growing really, really fast, not least in demand in response to the increasing demand for alternative energy generation sources, as countries not only here in South Africa and Southern Africa are increasingly looking to move away from fossil-fueled economies. Here in South Africa, with its abundance of wind and solar energy resources, we're working with partners in France, Germany, the US, and the EU, as part of what we call the International Partners Group, to support South Africa's ambitious plans for a just energy transition. And while internationally, South Africa may be a relatively small player, we do believe that its geographical location, coupled with the government's ambitions, as I've mentioned, for the JET, but also through their Renewable Energy Master Plan, and with the institutions they're putting in place to develop this sector, means that it's really well positioned to be a leading supplier into the broader Sub-Saharan African market. And it's in this regard that I'm absolutely delighted to share with you, along with our partners such as Africa House, Atlantis SEZ, Green Cape, the South African Electro-Technical Export Council, to give SIAC their full name, we've been able to support the sector already by delivering a wide range of interventions, such as facilitating linkages between SMEs and the renewable energy market, by developing digital marketing content for firms to participate in virtual events, as well as creating business-to-business opportunities for firms to participate in events such as the Africa Energy Indaba. We've also looked to support the development of duty exemptions for the renewable sector. We published a guide on duty exemptions for the renewable sector to enable competitive manufacturing. This guide lays out the criteria and compliance requirements, the duty exemptions, and the process for imported components which will be used in the manufacturing and/or assembling of renewable energy equipment here in South Africa. We also hosted a South African renewable energy product and expertise showcase hybrid event back in July last year. That event featured more than 120 business-to-business matchmaking opportunities. And lastly, but certainly not least, and the reason that we're gathered here today on this event is the creation of the Renewable Energy Projects Database, which is going to support exports from South Africa into the region by helping investors and suppliers to identify new opportunities and markets by setting out in great detail the size, input requirements, costs, status, country, applicable regional trade agreements, and the location of projects, everything that businesses need to know in order to make their investment decisions. And I'm absolutely delighted that through the support that we've offered through His Majesty's government, both our teams here in South Africa and our programs across Southern Africa, including, of course, TFSA, we've been able to deliver projects that I genuinely believe are going to continue to add value to this vital sector beyond the lifetime of this specific project. And I'm also really pleased to be able to announce that SAIC will be our partner on this project going forward, as was just mentioned, and they will be the official host of the Renewable Project Database. This event today is a precursor to SAIC formally launching the database under its brand in March 2023 at the Africa Energy Indaba, and I hope many of you joining this event will be there that day to celebrate this important step forward. So in closing, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Chiboni Evans and the entire SAIC team for their partnership in this absolutely vital work. We really do trust that you will continue to maximise the opportunities to position South Africa as a key hub for the renewable sector regionally and globally, including unlocking opportunities for women-owned businesses in this vital sector. Indeed, supporting women's economic empowerment is another strategic priority for the Trade Forward Southern Africa programme, and I'm looking forward to speaking about that at an event on Friday this week. It's also a priority for all of us in the UK and South Africa network that I have the privilege to lead. And to all the businesses present on this call, this event is really for you. It's a chance for you to hear about the database, a chance for you to learn how you can access it in the future with SAIC as the new host to unlock future economic opportunities. So last, but again, very much not least, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to all of our partners, including the TFSA delivery team, for joining in this important work. I look forward to hearing about your amazing export journeys going forward. Delighted to be with you this morning and very, very keen to stay in touch. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We really appreciate your presentation and really appreciate you taking your time from your very busy schedule to be with us this morning. So we kind of understand that you're a very busy man. You might be wanting to leave us, but we'll be very happy to have you for the rest of the session if possible. Without maybe taking too much time, I would like to get our brains behind the database, Duncan Bonnet from Africa House, to present on the database. And please feel free to ask questions on the chat. I'll actually be taking questions through to all the speakers as we towards the end of the webinar. Over to you, Duncan.
Thanks very much, Sim, and thank you, Your Excellency, for that introduction and for those kind and supportive words on this program. I hope everybody can see the presentation that I'm about to give, and then I will kick off. So as you've heard, we've been putting together this renewable energy database, and I'm just going to run through a little bit of what it is and the content and how it can be used. And I think just at the outset, and I think Chiboni, when she speaks to you in a moment, will just reiterate that there are two sides to it. The SAIC, the Electrotechnical Export Council, as the host, has a website that would be available to its members, which has a lot more detail in it than the public-facing website, which will give you a very good sense of the region and the opportunities. And then perhaps if you would like to engage with project developers and promoters more, you would be able to do that through SAIC and their membership scheme. So just in terms of Trade Forward Southern Africa, as you've been told, it's SACU plus Mozambique, and an attempt to grow regional and international export trade, green tech was identified for support in South Africa because from the regional perspective and from, I suppose, a continental perspective, South Africa is one of the leading locations for manufacturing and development of the sector. Within the green tech sector, it's very, very broad in terms of what we could have looked at. So we eventually looked at renewable energy because it really is part of a major driver of the renewable energy sector in South Africa, or of the green tech sector in South Africa, and of the broader energy sector in South Africa. And so we can look at supporting the localization of manufacturing or manufacturers that are already present to look beyond only the South African market into the broader regional market, much of which is in Southern Africa, but we've also taken it to include the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa for companies that are interested in exporting into the region. So within this, as His Excellency stated, we have a guide to establishing manufacturing and assembly operations in South Africa's SEZs using the available support to compete in local and regional projects. And that was undertaken by Donald Mackay and his team at XA International Trade Advisors. So they've put that sort of step-to-step guide because sometimes it can be a little bit confusing as to what you need to do in order to be able to undertake that. And then what we've looked at, what we'll be looking at today, is the database of projects and programs in Sub-Saharan Africa. There is a key focus on SADC, but it's not only around SADC, to highlight the opportunities for supply from South Africa to projects in the region. And that's what we at Africa House have been doing. We also then, in conjunction with TFSA, organized a conference and B2B event to highlight South African capabilities through the value chain and to link OEMs, South African suppliers, and institutions at that event to try and create those initial business linkages. And we were quite successful in getting a number of players into the room with potential off-takers of their products. And then ongoing support to keep business support organizations in South Africa to sustain this intervention and to ensure the success of the sector and growth of it in South Africa. And that is obviously being undertaken by Africa House and Trade Forward Southern Africa. So that really is the background to what we've been wanting to do with this program. The rationale behind the database, very simply, is that if you look at South Africa as a standalone, and I suppose with the when we started this process, much of the large-scale projects, both wind and solar, were linked to the renewable energy program, the REAP program, and as a result, it was a cyclical rather than an ongoing program. And in order to establish manufacturing in the region, you need not projects that come along every 2 to 3 years, but an ongoing project flow. And so we said, look, if we look at it from a regional perspective, perhaps you then get that regional offtake, which would allow you to establish in South Africa, not only to get the a consistent flow of potential projects, but also greater economies of scale that are available to you. So the key subsectors, as I've mentioned, it can be applied to almost all sectors of the economy without being too flippant. If you put in an energy-saving light bulb, some people say that's green tech for you. So as we said, we've looked at wind power and solar power initially, and then because in the last couple of years, and I think this is the exciting part of this program, is that it is such a fast-changing sector that we've included green hydrogen in it now as well. Green hydrogen obviously is produced through clean power and green power, which means that you are using both solar and wind power to produce that green hydrogen and then the ammonias and other offtake products from it. But it's also produced at scale, and I think that's an exciting part of what we're looking at. If you're looking at some of the bigger projects in Namibia and South Africa and Mauritania, for instance, you're looking at thousands of megawatts of power that are needed to produce the green hydrogen that would then be shipped off to Europe and other parts of the world, primarily at this stage Europe, but possibly parts of Asia as well, and hopefully some of it used domestically in the region. Wind and solar already becoming well established across the region, and I think we can see that whether it is at a microgrid level or at utility scale. And so there is a very, very good opportunity for suppliers in South Africa to start tapping into that landscape. And certainly as Africa House, we've been assisting some of our clients to establish a footprint in the region. And I think the landscape, as you'll see in a couple of the slides that follow, has evolved significantly over the last decade from just a small number of wind and solar projects linked to the IPP programs and offtake from central utilities to much broader and more dynamic sector. So whilst we still have a lot of the IPPs that are simply feeding into utility grids and so on, we also now have the mining and industrial sector, which is creating massive demand for renewable energy technologies. If you talk to the Minerals Council here in South Africa, they will say that they've got around 9,000 megawatts of current or potential renewable IPP projects in the pipeline. It's not just in South Africa. A company like First Quantum Minerals in Zambia is building around 430 or 440 megawatts of their own green power. First Quantum Minerals spends in excess of $600 million. I think it's actually closer to $1 billion a year in fuels like diesel for their mines in Zambia. So they're spending about $450 to $500 million to put in their own green energy to lessen that demand for diesel. And you can speak to almost every major business these days, from your large retailers like ShopRite, Checkers here in South Africa, which are looking to have 25% of their power delivered through solar PV or solar rooftop power in the next 3 to 5 years, to any of the other large industrial conglomerates, and they will tell you the same story. So it's a very, very dynamic sector. In terms of unpacking the opportunity, we've compiled this database of wind and solar and now green hydrogen projects across Sub-Saharan Africa. There are about 130 wind projects and over 1,100 solar projects. We've capped the solar at 5 megawatts. Because once you go below that, the numbers are just, there's too many for us to create a meaningful database of in terms of what we're doing. If you look at somewhere like perhaps one of the banks in Nigeria that we looked at, they had about 65 branches and each one was putting in a bit of rooftop solar. Together, it still only came to about 1.5 or 2 megawatts of power. So when you're getting down to your sort of home level or very small scale projects, we've excluded those. So 5 megawatts and upwards, and looking at those projects. Some of the projects obviously are completed, and I think what's important about the completed projects is obviously they require maintenance on an ongoing basis, but some of the older solar and wind projects, not just in South Africa, but in places like Cabo Verde, where they've longhand wind turbines, will come to end of life. These installations are not operating in perpetuity. Most of them have a 20 to 25-year lifespan. And then what? How do you dispose of used solar panels, or what? How do you take down wind turbines and towers and so on? So there's an opportunity in that is on the horizon as well. Pipeline projects, obviously from feasibility to construction, some of the conceptual projects as well, because it allows you to sort of start aligning your thought with where you want to go. Renewable energy programs within countries, we are adding some of those in as well where they make sense. They could include elements such as hydro, biomass, and so on and so forth, but a lot of them also have wind or solar or green hydrogen in them. So total value of projects from conceptual to completed is close to $250 billion. It might actually be a little bit more than that now. Many of the projects announced in the last 18 months or so don't have a defined value. So it could take the overall value to over $300 billion. And, I mean, that is a sizable amount of money that's available to projects in the region. Obviously, not every project will come to fruition within the timeframes that we expect. But since the first analysis that we did in July at the B2B meeting, there's been an additional 8,000 megawatts of solar and another 2,500 megawatts of wind that have been added to the platform. That excludes the latest round of REAP projects in South Africa because of the current uncertainty around some of those. And then 66,000 megawatts of green hydrogen. You can see what green hydrogen does to this, the absolute game changer that it could be if we're able to supply goods and services from South Africa into some of those projects. And many of them are very close to us. So the update that we did was the original update was from March to October last year. A further update due, this is the one that we're doing now, November to January, and then we will be doing on an ongoing process of updates over the next 3 years with SAIC on these projects. And Shiboni will talk to that a little bit more. So just in terms of unpacking that opportunity, you can see there in terms of wind power, relatively few projects from 2014 to 2016 out of South Africa, and not all of them came to fruition. Mauritania obviously leads the way, and you'll see it in the solar as well, and in the green hydrogen, because they have 2 massive green hydrogen projects, both very long-term developments that are at the sort of conceptual and scoping stages. Mauritania obviously has got a lot of empty and very sunny land, so it's something you can develop quite nicely. And then the South African REAP projects, as well as our own green hydrogen, Namibia's green hydrogen projects, you can see they take up the bulk. And then Kenya, obviously with the 300 megawatt, it was the sort of the first multiple megawatt large-scale project outside of South Africa, the Lake Turkana wind project that comes into operation. Ethiopia, Tanzania, Ghana, Zambia, and some of the others that you can see there. I think in addition to South Africa, what's important is that South Africa currently enjoys tariff-free access to another 13% of the projects in the region through either SACU or SADC. So we have preferential access to around 41% of the wind projects in the region. And then most of the rest of them are fairly easily accessible from South Africa by road or rail, as well as sea for the islands and Tanzania. If we then start to look towards the African Continental Free Trade Area, we will see that percentage that we can access duty-free rise exponentially. So unpacking the opportunity, you can see there very few projects in the early phases, but as we now get into 2023, 24, and then from 2025 onwards, there is an exponential increase in the number of wind projects. You can see there the number of wind projects or the megawatts that are going to be delivered that have an unstated timeline for project delivery. And so you can see there that will start to flow in that period, probably from 2025 to 2030. So those numbers towards the second half of this decade will increase quite a bit. And it will, that's from there. Solar, unpacking the opportunity. Again, Mauritania, because of the green hydrogen, but South Africa, again, has a lot. And if you were to include all of the smaller projects that I was referring to, then South Africa's numbers are probably well in excess of that 35% share. Roughly 42,000 megawatts of solar projects in operation, under construction, or declared. So a lot of them. A couple of very exciting announcements in the last few weeks. Zambia has seen around 2,000 megawatts from a Dubai-based company, promised largely in solar, but possibly in wind as well, taking its share of the regional basket up to 6%. So the total SADC share will be around 20% of that, outside of South Africa's 35% share. So you'll be able to see over 50% of those solar projects available to South African suppliers. And then again, your East and West African countries accessible from here. Again, unpacking that, the unstated, obviously, because they have unstated, we would look probably starting this year and next year to even out those unstated volumes into the basket. So I would imagine that from 2023 to 2030, you're looking at an average of around 4,000 megawatts or so of solar power being added into the regional grid, and that's at a utility scale. That's not at your home scale or small or mini grid scale. I don't know what the numbers on that are to give you an accurate figure, but I think you will probably see, with the changes in the legislation and should we see incentives being given in South Africa to rooftop solar at a domestic level, you could probably add a substantial amount more into that every year. And then again, the number of solar panels required, looking at how many millions of panels you would need, you can see there. So from very, very small amounts in the past, and we're now looking at anywhere between sort of 4, 5, 6 million panels a year and upwards over the next few years. So it is a very exciting development. Green hydrogen, you can see there with Mauritania. And the DRC, that's the DRC is the only one that is actually based on hydropower. So that wouldn't necessarily be of interest, but it would be of interest for those companies that are then manufacturing the technology to transfer green hydrogen out of Africa and to Europe. So we've put it in there anyway because of the size of that project, which has reached a relatively advanced stage of negotiation. So you can see there, these green hydrogen projects really are, some of them are very, very large. And the costs around them obviously make them quite complicated projects, but some of them have got quite far down the line as well. Namibia, obviously, you can see there, $9.4 billion, 7,000 megawatts of capacity, and that one is fairly far advanced. The South African one just next to it, 9,000 megawatts of capacity. A little bird whispered in my ear this morning that is starting to gain a little bit more traction, and that there might be some very, very other exciting developments in Boegoebaai around that and around hydrogen and some other things as well. So those are, you can just see, are very, very exciting projects should they come off. And I think with the way the world is moving, they are more guaranteed to, or more likely to proceed than perhaps mega projects like this were in the past in the region. So looking forward, this kind of report will be updated every quarter and will be available to companies through the database host, through Jaboni and her team. The project information will be available to companies and business support organizations at a top level if they're not a host member, and then the host will, the SAIC will hold a more comprehensive database, including more detailed project data, which will include things like the names of the project developers, the EPCs, and the funders, and so on. So those who are members of the council would be able to get that. And if you want to know more, at this stage, you can contact either Sim, who has been our host this morning, or Zinhle Pakati at Trade Forward Southern Africa, Sim obviously at DAI. And that is the end of my presentation. I would just like to share, perhaps whilst Jaboni is getting ready, just the sort of the publicly available this will obviously not be in an Excel spreadsheet. It'll be in a web presentation. So you'll be able to see there which country the project is in, how many megawatts, where we have a value attached to it, the year it's going to be in operational. Are they members? Is the country, so you can see there Mauritania, no, it's not a member of SACU, it's not a member of SADC, but in terms of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, it has deposited its articles. So we will hopefully be able to see some movement on that, you know, and you'll be able to go through it. So somewhere like Tanzania, it's not a member of SADC, but yes, it is a member of, sorry, not a member of SACU, is a member of SADC. So we already have preferential access into that. And then kind of the number of solar panels that you would need for some of those projects. We've got them in the initial database all the way down to the very small projects, although those won't be at the in the eventual one, simply because of the requirements for updating it. So that, I think, is all from me. I'm sure there will be questions a little bit later, but I'd like to go back to Sim, who will obviously introduce Chiboni. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for that detailed information. I think that's very, very useful. And as Cynthia said earlier on our chat group, some of this information, if you need to pick it up, it's actually going to be on our YouTube channel. I think what's important now really is just to introduce our partner, SAEC. This is a partner that's really been in this space for a long time, that know what is going on, that understand the industry very well. And it was really never a challenge for TFSA to work with to work with SAEC and have them as our partner going forward as the project gets to its end. So I'd like to just maybe give Chiboni, the CEO of SAEC, an opportunity just to talk to us about what the plans are going forward for the database. I know she has plenty of plans because we've been talking about it for a long time. Over to you, Chiboni.
Okay, I've unmuted myself.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sim, for that introduction. And thank you to the High Commissioner for the support that has been given to not just a specific project, but I think to all the work that TFSA is doing in the various sectors. I do sit in the National Steering Committee, so I'm aware of all the other work in the other sectors that has been undertaken by this program. And I think it's been quite a useful and successful program for the South Africans and the other SACU plus M countries. Duncan, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think you covered quite a lot. I'm not going to take too long. What I would like to do is perhaps just start off by with a few slides, just showing people who the SAEC are, what we do, and then they can see how we fit in. And then I'll talk to the database and how we are going to manage it and assist South African companies and exporters to be able to participate in the projects that are going to be developing as a result of the database. So you can see from the slogan at the bottom that one of our key aims as an organization and our mandates from the Department of Trade, Industry Competition is to grow South Africa's electrotechnical exports. We have got a keen focus on the African continent because that is where our members see the largest growth, and also because of the deficit that exists in the energy sector on the African continent. Let me just see if I can move this presentation along. So just very quickly, SAEC is a non-profit organization, which is a partnership between Department of Trade, Industry and Competition and the private sector in the electrotechnical space. And our mandate, as I said, is to facilitate the international trade of our members. We also act as a formal gateway between government and private sector. And we've got a key mandate as well from government to grow the SMME base and to introduce new exporters into the market. So you'll see from our membership, we have all the way from large organizations such as the Siemens of this world and ABBs and so on, to the small SMMEs that we are growing. And we've also got, as the High Commissioner mentioned before, a lot of support that we received during COVID times to capacitate our SMMEs to be able to still participate in international events virtually. And then we've still continued to have support for them in the physical space, again, supported by SMMEs, by TFSA. We are, and some of our other provincial agencies will be profiling 20 SMMEs at Africa Energy Indaba this year. There are 18 export councils in total who are all recognized by the DTIC. And the reason I'm showing this is that there's an importance around our ability to be able to be recognized by the DTIC because of the support that we can get for our members and on behalf of our members through the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. I won't go into too much of this, just to show that we have over 100 members in our membership base, and we're also part of a grouping of other export councils. Of the 18 I showed you before, there's 6 of them that came together, and we call ourselves the Engineering and Technology Grouping of Export Council, and we collectively represent over 1,000 companies in South Africa. And our mandate as the ETCG grouping is to see how we can increase African participation, African company participation in African projects on the African continent. So you'll see that us managing and working with this database is important because we want to actually ensure that we can get as many South African and African businesses involved in the implementation of those projects when they take place. So these are just the sectors that we cover. Other than energy, we also cover consumer and defense electronics and ICT and digital communications. Why the focus on renewable energy? From South Africa, obviously, we believe that we've grown a good base of credible organizations that have supplied into our REIPP program over the years. Yes, I know that there has been some criticism around the pace at which the REIPP has gone, but we cannot deny the fact that we have got 120 projects in the renewable energy space that have been implemented over the last 12 years. And if you look at the size of those projects, there has been capability and capacity that has been built in South Africa in terms of developing and managing and installing and thereafter managing those renewable energy projects in the various areas. And so we want to take this expertise and utilize what we've done in South Africa, and what the companies have done in South Africa, to see how we can assist with building Africa's energy infrastructure. One of the key things that I just took this one particular area. So there's 2 elements. There's one that Africa has to electrify according to the SDG 7 goal. By 2030, we must be able to have provided electricity, clean electricity, to the total of Africa's population. We're currently sitting at still 600 million Africans without access to electricity. There's different figures that are bandied about, but I've assumed if you take each household to have 3 to 4 people in a house, it means that we will need 200 new connections by 2030 in the next 7 years, which means we're looking at approximately 30 million connections per year. And that's quite a lot. Getting those connections done means that we need to install that infrastructure. And the question is then, who's going to install the infrastructure? And what we're saying is that it must be African businesses, it must be South African businesses, and where possible, there must be a great participation by SMMEs, and there must also be a great participation by SMMEs that are women-owned. And to that end, you'll see in another slide that I show you that we have partnered with an organization called African Women in Energy and Power, and I saw Bertha was online before, to see how we can ensure that at every step of the way, we're ensuring that we have got women-owned companies who are technically capable and have also been supported financially to be able to participate in building this infrastructure. Just to go into South Africa itself, there's a number of programs that we're looking at, as I spoke to you about the REIPP program, but also in terms of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. They're very ambitious in terms of what they're trying to achieve with regards to local content. I did see a question before in the chat about localization and local content, and I'll respond to that in the Q&A. But we do believe that it is important that we do ensure that there's a certain amount of local content and local capability that is being built in South Africa by South Africans, so that we can use that to export and build the rest of the African infrastructure. The question is, how do we do it to make sure that it is sustainable? We then have other, you saw one of the key prongs of the SDG 7 was also around energy efficiency. Through the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, they have got a program that they're running because they've recognized the amount of real estate that they are responsible for. And what they're saying is that we need to obviously go green on a lot of our properties. either by putting solar in, by putting energy efficient bulbs in, by putting other energy efficient resources into these various facilities. And again, what they're saying here is that we must be giving that business to South African businesses, and we must specifically be giving it to SMMEs and to women-owned SMMEs. So there's local projects that we're also looking at ensuring that our SMMEs participate in. So, sorry, I think I've gone the wrong way. Just in terms of the database, the database then, as Duncan says, we're going to have a front end which is going to be open access to a broader audience. And this will be available through various projects, through various websites. One of them obviously is the SAEC website. We're talking to other agencies to see who will be able to host the landing page on their website so that a broader grouping of people have access to this information. And then the more detailed ones, I want to drill down into more detail in terms of who's the project owner, what is the site, what is the procurement requirement. That will be done through a portal within the SAEC website as an SAEC member. In addition to understanding the detail around the project, our intent, remember, as I said, is to make sure that we can get African participation in these projects. So then we sit down with our members and we say, what can we execute? Where do we go? Why do we go? And then through the programs and the support that we get from the DTIC, we then motivate for missions to be taken into some of those countries so that we can then go on the ground and actually have discussions with the project owners in country. But before that, as I said, as Duncan mentioned, we are going to be launching the database itself on the 9th of March at Africa Energy Indaba this year. And then we will have quarterly updates together with Africa House. And this is part of a program that we've been running over the years, but this one will be specifically quarterly updates on this database. So the launch that we're going to have is going to be in a purpose-built structure at Energy Indaba called the Africa Energy Conclave. And one of the things that's going to be happening there, again, supported by the DTIC, we've just confirmed this morning that we're now sitting at 22 confirmed African energy sector leaders from 12 African countries that will be coming to present their projects at the Africa Projects Conclave within Africa Energy Indaba. Now, what this is going to do for us, first of all, is going to give you first-hand information from the project owners themselves as to these are the projects that we've got. It also gives businesses the opportunities to then to have discussions with them afterwards and interrogate those projects. But I think from our side, together with Africa House, Duncan, it is also going to give us the opportunity to make sure that we can validate the information that we're building up in the database that we're now going to create in terms of our renewable energy database, because we'll be talking to those project owners directly. And then we've got, as I say, a program over the 3 days, and you can see that on the 9th of March is when we're going to be launching the new renewable energy program. Just for our SMMEs in the room, as I mentioned before, we have partnered with Africa Women in Energy and Power, and we'll be launching a program specifically on the Tuesday for the SMMEs in the renewable energy sector, so that we can link them up with OEMs and strengthen them in terms of how they can then be able to participate in this work on the African continent going forward. Because SMMEs on their own sometimes struggle in terms of their balance sheet to be able to talk into a project, but they can, if they partner with larger companies, be able to go in and work with those larger companies and execute those projects. So that in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is what the SAEC is going to be doing. I think just to conclude is to say, we're not just taking on the database to keep it as a database, but we want to make sure that we can utilize it, interrogate it for the benefit of our members and South African exporters, so that ultimately we can go in there and be part of the process of implementing and executing those projects on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shibani, for that detailed presentation. Greatly appreciated. I think one thing that really resonates with us as a project as well is the involvement of SMMEs in the database, and also obviously the women in trade having access to that, which is really, for us, we're very deliberate about that as a project. So thank you so much for that presentation. There are quite a few questions that have been asked, and while you're still on Chiboni and Duncan, maybe I'll just try and just pick up one or two. I think, as you rightly noted, most of them are really around the manufacture of some of the components in South Africa. So a question from Gareth Belly, I think it's related to what Bully was asking. So I'll ask maybe Chibone to just respond to that, and also with the help of Duncan. And the question is, localization of technology a genuine priority in South Africa? And I'll link that one up with what was asked by Buli earlier about asking about solar panels used in this projects. Are they manufactured in South Africa? So really talking about manufacture, is it a priority, and is it really actually happening in South Africa? If you don't mind, maybe just responding to that, Chibone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sim. So I think in terms of the localization of technology, obviously there are certain renewable energy technologies that don't reside in South Africa, and I think we've also done a lot of work in our sector together with the DTIC in terms of what do we localize and why do we localize it. So there is an understanding and appreciation that there's some areas where it would be totally uncompetitive, and there's no need for us to be able to localize. And I know more than anybody else, because we also deal in the electronic sector, and there's certain areas where in the electronic side, we know we cannot compete globally, so we don't go there in trying to localize. But what we do and work closely with government and companies here is to make sure that where South African companies have got the capabilities or have got the ability to develop the capability, we start to grow those industrial bases, and we protect the ones that already do exist. So if I take, for instance, the renewable energy space, and I'll just give an example. So we're not going to focus too much on the technologies that we're not going to be competitive in. But the one thing that we will do, if, for instance, is, and I just had this discussion, in fact, yesterday with one of our member companies, where we're looking at something like in terms of maintenance, the cleaning of solar panels. Currently, I don't think we've actually adequately developed that skill and expertise. Now, if we're not careful and if we're not deliberate about making sure we localize certain components of what we do as we build the plant and the equipment for renewable energies, we're going to start going to the lowest level and starting to import the skills and the ability to clean solar panels. So what we're saying is that things like that, we must make sure we are deliberate and we're consciously localizing those components, and that business then goes to South African businesses, specifically SMMEs. So that's just one example, and we can talk about the area around local content and designation, and it's a big, and I know it's a very controversial topic, but we cannot allow for none of the work to be locally done. But we are aware of those where we are not competitive, and therefore we won't want to start localizing those components. In terms of the solar panel manufacturers, we do have a number of solar panel manufacturers in South Africa. I do know, for instance, in the Eastern Cape, that one of the largest solar panel manufacturers, Seraphim, are actually even increasing their capacity in terms of, I think they're going from about a 4,000 to 10,000 square meter facility. So we have got manufacturers in country. And again, even with that, there has been a deliberate move by government to ensure that as they keep increasing their capacity, and we understand that they're growing the footprint, not just in South Africa, but on the African continent, we begin to increase the level of local content in that solar panel manufacture. So I think they're currently sitting at about 35–40%, and their target is to get to about 60% in terms of the manufacture of solar panels in South Africa. So that is something that is happening. I hope that answers the two questions.
Thank you, Chibone. I think that's clear enough. And again, the database is going to be able to show all that information. So that's the beauty of the database that we're creating. I think the last question that I'll just take, I'm cognizant of the time. There's just 5 minutes left. I think for Duncan, really, I think you mentioned quite a lot of opportunities that were picked up by Buli, and she just wanted to find out how do firms become part of the team to execute the projects on the pipeline? In other words, how do they actually get to access some of these opportunities to be able to grow their businesses? Maybe Duncan, you can respond to that.
Thanks. The short answer is to become a member of SAIC, because they will have more complete access to the project promoters and developers and so on. So that really is it. You can obviously kind of search around for projects on your own, but shortcutting that would be to chat to Chibone and her team and become a member of SIAC, so that you have the access to the more complete database. I just want to pick up in 1 minute on to add to what Shaboni was saying about local content. I think the purpose of this, and I've been scrolling through the companies that are here this morning, and it's delightful to see that there are a lot of companies that are in the services side of the industry. And this is aimed at you as well. So whether you're a consulting engineer, a contractor, a logistics company, a training enterprise, whatever it happens to be, the idea is that you would be able to demonstrate capacity. Because one of the things that's become really apparent in the last couple of years through the COVID pandemic and now the war in Ukraine is that when there is a global crisis, Africa gets dumped. And I say that bluntly because that is the truth. And we really do need to become a lot more resilient and self-reliant, and not always at the behest of the outside world. So for instance, during the COVID pandemic, the cost of steel in Nairobi rose by 15% overnight. If you've got $1 billion project, that's a very, very big increase in your capital expenditure. And, I know that with some of the disruptions that have been created over the last or the last year or so with the Ukraine conflict and some of the shipping issues, the cost of some of the imported solar technologies have risen by up to 20 to 25%. So it is something that we can say to the rest of the region is, guys, we have the ability here to not only manufacture or supply components into your projects, but we have the logistics companies that can put them in place. We have the law firms that can structure the projects correctly. We have banks that have an appetite for large projects. So we can provide a very complete service into the project sector in the region. And then obviously the skills to offer operations and maintenance and so on as well. So I just wanted to add that into it. Thanks, Sim.
Thank you very much, Duncan. I think that's very, very useful. It is 12 o'clock, and I know we could go on for quite a while because it's quite an interesting topic we're having. But I think just to briefly just touch on what we're looking to do going forward. Really, I think it's been mentioned by Chiboni that the launch is actually on the 9th of March at the Africa Energy Indaba. As GFSA, we are going to be supporting that work and to ensure that that goes forward. Our partner is very capable, but we are quite happy to say we also deliberate about supporting market linkages with some of the firms under SIAC. So we will be participating, actually showcasing some of our partnering firms, SMEs, to actually access the markets. That's what we really looking to do in the short term in this space. But I think from my side, really, I want to thank Chiboni, I want to thank Duncan, and also the participants for actually joining us this afternoon at this pre-launch. We really appreciated your time, and we actually, I know the High Commissioner has left, but we're really grateful for his attendance as well. For us, it means a lot, and we really look forward to further engagements. I think I'll close off now. If there's more questions, we'll pick them up and respond accordingly. I'd like to thank everybody for taking their time, and we're looking forward to further engagements going forward. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sim.
Thank you. Bye.